on the Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. We're about to turn the page, and we were learning this somewhat complicated Gemara with a lulav of Avodah Zarah. The Gemara brought a contradiction, contradiction from the Mishnah, and of course these are cases where we're not so familiar with these type of laws. A person worships a tree for Avodah Zarah. I mean, it's not exactly something that we come in contact with. It's I know that there was the whole issue with the people growing their hair for idol worship. That was a whole scandal. But the fact that people bowing down to trees and to trees. I mean, most of our lulavim come from, if I'm not mistaken, they come from Egypt. And I'm not sure. I don't think that it's common there to worship trees. If it was from Tibet, maybe, or maybe other places where they have these Eastern religions and so on. But bowing down to trees I don't think is that common. So. But nevertheless, the Gemara is the Gemara is dealing with this case because the Mishnah mentioned it in a lulav shel Asherah in the time of the Gemara. Maybe it was more common. A lulav of an Asherah tree was from a tree that was worshipped, and the Gemara had a contradiction. One place it says it's kosher, the other place says you shouldn't really use it, but if you used it, it'll work. So it's either not kosher at all or it's kosher after the fact. And what was the Gemara's answer? The Gemara's answer was a very cryptic answer. Here, we're talking about the Asherah of Moshe. Now, of course, it doesn't mean Moshe's Asherah. It means in Moshe's time. And it doesn't exactly mean Moshe's time either, because it means in the time when they were Kovish Eretz Yisrael. So, really right after Moshe. It means Moshe's maybe in the time of Moshe, but it really means like right after his time. And he can't even say his generation, because his generation died out in the desert. So it means the fact that there were Yidden that were worshiping idols. In the time of Moshe, that's when there were Yidden that were worshiping idols. And the pasuk clearly states, Va'asherehem tisrafun ba'esh. You have to burn their Asherah trees, the trees that were worshipped, to burn it in fire. So this is the answer that the Gemara gives, that we're talking about Asherah of Moshe. It has to be burned in fire, and lulav is katuse michtas shiure. It's going to be missing. It's going to be chopped up. Its measurement, since it's meant to be burned, and because it's going to be, the law is that it has to be burned. Therefore, you would not have the measure that a lulav needs. Because you won't have the measure that a lulav needs, it will be an invalid lulav. Now, so what is the other case talking about? In other words, when you have a contradiction and you say, well, this case is talking about this. Normally, you also explain what the other case is. The other case is talking about that, and it's not a contradiction. Here, the Gemara just says one side. Just says, you know what? Here we're talking about the Asherah of Moshe. And in fact, Rashi surprisingly doesn't explain the other side of the coin. What's the other case talking about where the Asherah is going to be kosher after the fact? All it says is the Asherah of Moshe, that's the one that's not going to be kosher at all. And the one, the case that is kosher after the fact, if you shook with this lulav of a Avodah Zarah, that is kosher after the fact. You're not supposed to shake with it; it's disgusting. But if you shook with it, it's going to be okay. It's going to be kosher. What is that case talking about? It's not talking about the case of Asherah de Moshe. It's not talking about a case where a Jew worshipped this tree, but in the time of Moshe. But what is it talking about? So it's interesting. The Tzemach Tzedek has a tshuva. He has a responsa with a case. It's surprising, but this happens when after a person divorces someone. So they like to create problems often or sometimes.
No.
So here, listen to what this guy came up with. He says, he probably waited till after the wife remarried, and maybe she even has kids. And he comes up and he says, "Oh," he doesn't say that part that she remarried already, but he says the get was given, and after months later, the megaresh, the person who divorced, decides to he comes to court and he says this document, this paper that the divorce document was written on, a Jew bowed down to it as an idol. A Jew that worships idols bowed down to this paper. And therefore,
so did he.
And therefore, it maybe is not a good get. The get is Isser Hana. So
we're talking about the divorce decree, or we're talking about the paper from the Bezdin that says you are divorced?
No, it's the
no, I
get
know,
that was written.
I know. I'm trying to think of which one he would bow down to.
So the Tzemach Tzedek has a whole long page. I must say it's complicated. He goes through this discussion, and the conclusion is that he's not believed.
Okay.
Baruch Hashem. And conclusion is it's connected to this Gemara that we're learning here. And he says that the law this law of chatus that it's considered comes out that the law that it's considered destroyed is only something that's supposed to be burned, and something that's supposed to be dissolved in some other way but not burning, then we don't say this rule of chatuse michtas shiure. We don't say that it's no longer has a shear. In other words, the Gemara here says that what's the problem with this Asherah of Moshe? The problem is that a Jew bowed down to it, and the law is that the Asherah trees in Moshe Rabbeinu's time, there was a biblical obligation to burn it down. Asherehem tisrafun ba'esh. That law doesn't apply afterwards to other Asherah trees. It only applies to the Asherah trees that were in the time of Moshe, and if they're still around now, they would still apply. That it has to be burned as a mitzvah of burning in fire, and it's a pasuk in Re'eh, I think. Re'eh, Shoftim, and one of those parshiyos in Devarim. It's in Deuteronomy, where you'd have to burn the Asherah. Asherayim tisrafum ba'esh. The obligation that didn't apply then, but the regular halacha of something of avodah zarah is that it has to be nignaz. Of avodah zarah of a Yisrael has to be nignaz. The meaning of nignaz that doesn't mean geniza. What it really means is that it has to be crumbled, and you have to throw it to the wind. It has to be destroyed, but not not that it has to be burned. This law that something is burned and is only needs to be turned into ashes, this is where the law applies that it no longer has a measure. This law applies only to something that's oimed lisaref, something that's supposed to be burned. We consider it as if it is burned already. Something that's not, if something that's just supposed to be destroyed, like Geniza, we don't say such a thing. And therefore, the way Rashi is learning is that only that we're talking about Avodah Zarah of a Yisrael, both cases, even Rava's case, Lulav of Avodah Zarah of a Yisrael, and the other cases of Avodah Zarah of a Yisrael. But if it's the Asherah of Moshe, it has to be burned. If it's an Lulav of Avodah Zarah of a Yisrael of nowadays, it doesn't have to be burned. And because of that, we don't say, only in a case of burning do we say this kol ha'omed lisaref kasaruf dami. Anything that's supposed to be burned is considered like it's burned and it doesn't have a measure anymore, and therefore it will not be a problem to use after the fact. That's the way the Tzemach Tzedek is learning Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. So both cases are a Yisrael. We're talking about an Avodah Zarah of Yisrael. One is the Asherah of Moshe, and the other is the regular Asherah of today. One needs to be burned. The other needs to be, it's called Nignaz, Gonos, Geniza. And the meaning of Geniza, at least according to Teves in the Ritva, where it talks about this in Avodah Zarah, tractate Avodah Zarah, is Lishchoik Belizrais Laruach. I don't know if Rashi agrees with that. Rashi just, I mean, the Gemara there says that it has to be nignaz. It's I could pull it up. Let's pull up page. The Zara Nun Beis. We could look at Rashi over there. Let me see if I could pull up the Gemara there. Here. Avodah Zarah Nun Beis. So the Gemara in Avodah Zarah on page 52b. So the Gemara here says that it deals with how do you mevatel the Avodah Zarah, that a guy can be mevatel, he can nullify his Avodah Zarah, and then oh, it's 52a. One second, it's 52a. So okay, how do you know Avodah Zarah of Yisrael needs Geniza? It says V'sam Basaser. What does Rashi say over there? That when it's Shlema Genuza Bakarka, Shehi Shlema Genuza Bakarka, that you just put it in the ground. So Rashi argues, I guess, with Teves over there. And because of that, what comes out is that there's a different, that you wouldn't say in that scenario where where it doesn't have to be destroyed. Now, there's Tysus over there learns that it has to be destroyed, but according to Rashi, it doesn't have to be destroyed. It has to be put in the ground, geniza. And if that's so, according to that, it doesn't lose its measure. It stays its measure. So you're not going to say that it no longer has a shear, has a measurement that the lulav needs. So there, that would be an understanding in Rashi, that way Rashi learns that the regular Asherah doesn't need to be burned, but the Asherah of Moshe needs to be burned. And that would be the difference. That would be the answer that the Gemara is giving. Now, there are numerous other ways of learning this Gemara, and we mentioned another point yesterday, and that was the other understanding that there's a difference between Avodah Zarah of a Yid and an Avodah Zarah of a Goy. That the Avodah Zarah of a Yid there's no way to nullify it. Avodah Zarah of a Goy, you can nullify it. So according to that, the answer that the Gemara gives is that the place where it says that a lulav of Avodah Zarah or Asherah is not valid at all, that's talking about Asherah of a Yid, Asherah de Moshe, but there were Yid that worshipped idols. The other type of case is Avodah Zarah of a Goy, a non-Jew's idol. You want to use his lulav that he worshipped. Avodah Zarah somehow worshipped it. He threw it to his idol, or the custom in his the way it was served. His idol was that you take this, you wave this palm branch, right? The Goyim have this something, a Palm Wednesday or something. I don't know what they do, but there is some type of thing where they get it from. That's this thing. This is Avodah Lulav of Avodah Zarah. That's where it probably comes from. That's why it's applicable here. There is such a concept. So that lulav that they used for their avodah zarah, a guy can nullify it. Because he can nullify it, it's not necessarily going to be destroyed, not necessarily going to be burned, and therefore it's not oimed lisarif. Therefore, you can take it from him and shake it for a mitzvah. So what we're talking about is, do you own this lulav? No. It's owned by the guy. If you owned it, it would be a problem. It would have to be burned. It would have to be destroyed. But because it's owned by a guy, therefore it's going to be okay. It's going to be why? Because he might nullify it. He's going to realize it's not his idols are not worth anything. He's going to say, this is forget it. I'm not interested in my whole avodah zarah. No. And he'll denounce it, and he'll say that's not good, and therefore his lulav has a size to it. Now, according to this, it must be talking about that it's not the first day of Sukkot, because on the first day of Sukkot, you need to own your lulav. It wasn't about an avodah zarah of a guy, and it was not nullified yet. We're just saying it could be nullified, and therefore it would be, because it could be nullified. Therefore, it's not considered that it doesn't have a measure, but it's still not nullified yet. And therefore, you don't own it; it's his. It's the guy's. So when are we talking about? We're not talking about the first days of. We're not talking about the first days of Sukkot, the first day of Sukkot. We're talking about the later days of Sukkot that you could use it. It's a avodah zarah of a guy. You're using it. Why are you using it? Because it's a guy's. If it was a yid's avodah zarah, you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's the other way of learning the Gemara. That's the difference that the Gemara gives. And then the Gemara says, and how do we know that this is the case? Because it's similar to the Ir Hanidachas, that just like your Ir Hanidachas has to be burned, this also is something that's going to be burned. And that's what the Gemara understands, that that's the type of case that we're talking about in the Mishnah. So that was the, it gives us a little understanding, a little of the other commentaries of how to learn, how to explain the two cases. There is one other way of learning it, and that is that the lulav of a Shera of Moshe means that it was planted in order to worship. And the other type of lulav of avodah zarah is not that it was planted to worship, but after it was planted, you started worshiping it. It became worshipped. And such a avodah zarah is would be permitted to benefit from. And now there's a case where you have to burn it is when it's planted in order to worship. So so the other types of cases that it's even avodah zarah of a yid, but it wasn't planted for that purpose. It was planted as a tree. And then you went and afterwards and you started worshiping it. So there it would be permissible to benefit from, and there wouldn't be a problem to shake. It's a problem to shake it in the first place because it's still mius, it's still disgusting. But nevertheless, after the fact, it would be kosher. The case where it was planted to be avodah zarah, that would be the Asherah of Moshe. That would be considered invalid even after the fact. Okay, so that's another interpretation here of the Gemara. The next Gemara that we're gonna let me just read it all inside since we're doing all these explanations. I'm gonna start again from 5 lines up from the bottom on page Lamed Aleph Amud Beis 31b, and we'll learn it inside. 31b, 5 lines from the bottom. Shel Asherah v'shel Ir Hanidachas. That it's a Asherah tree, a lulav, palm branch from the Asherah tree, from this tree that's worshipped as a avodah zarah, as an idol. V'shel Ir Hanidachas, or a palm tree, a palm branch, a lulav that's from a city that's supposed to be burned because the majority of the people there worshipped idols in that city. So all those cases, you can't use the lulav even after the fact. You weren't yaitze, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. If you did shake with it, you did not fulfill the mitzvah. It's not a valid lulav. The Gemara says, Mishal Asherah, puzzle, is it really invalid? V'amar Rava, doesn't Rava say lulav shel avodah zarah lo yitol? If it's a lulav that's worshipped as an idol, either because Rashi gave a few examples that they either used it as a broom to sweep up in front of the avodah zarah, so it's called the tashmishe avodah zarah, which has a lot of tractate avodah zarah talks about the tashmishim of avodah zarah, the things that are ancillaries for the avodah zarah. Is that the term? So it's used in front of the avodah zarah, or it's
tools, paraphernalia.
Okay, tools of the avodah zarah. Or the other option that Rashi gives, he gives two other options, that it's actually used as part of the worship. One is that they would bring it in front of the avodah zarah. They would pass it by the avodah zarah, which sounds like it's some type of way of worshiping, that the custom of that avodah zarah was to worship it that way. Or the third option is lezarka by, that they would throw this in front of the avodah zarah, almost like a sacrifice, almost like the blood, a sprinkling of blood, and the leaves would fall off when it would go. The understanding in Rashi is that the leaves would fall off, so it's similar to the sprinkling of the blood, that things would separate and fall off. Now, so that is what we're referring to, this type of avodah zarah. But the law, the Gemara understands, should be similar to an Asherah tree. A lulav of an Asherah tree should be similar. They're all part of the same avodah zarah laws, and the law should be the same. So the Gemara is surprised that the lulav of avodah zarah you're not supposed to take, but if you took it, it is kosher. But our Mishnah said an Asherah tree of lulav is not kosher, even after the fact. So the Gemara answers, Hacha ba'asherah de Moshe askinon. Here, in our Mishnah, we're talking about the Asherah tree of Moshe's time, where Yidden would worship an idol, worship this Asherah trees. The measure of the lulav is considered to be broken down, because it's ro'oi l'sreifa, it's fit to be burned, and therefore it's considered that it's no longer the measure that a lulav needs to be. And that's the reason why in our Mishnah it's not good even after the fact. Now, the question is, what is the other case talking about where it is kosher after the fact? It's not preferable to use, but after the fact, it is kosher. So on that, we had a few ways of understanding. Number one could be that it's talking about a Yid's Avodah Zarah, but the Yid's Avodah Zarah after the time of Moshe Rabbeinu needs to be nignaz, needs to be buried, and it doesn't have to be destroyed. It needs to be buried. So a Yid's Avodah Zarah that not from the time of Moshe has different laws. It needs to be buried, and therefore it would not be considered michtas chatuse michtas yurei, that it no longer has the measure. It does have the measure. It stays the same size. It doesn't have to be burned, turned into ashes. Another pshat we said was it's talking about a Yid's Avodah Zarah, but he didn't plant it in order to worship. Instead, it was just worshipped after the fact. So an Asherah tree that was planted, that has to be burned. And the Rav is talking about a case where it's going to be kosher after the fact. That's a case where it was planted, and only afterwards it was chosen to be used for this for Avodah Zarah. And then in that scenario, it would have more lenient laws. It wouldn't be prohibited to benefit from, and so on. So that's another interpretation of this Gemara. And then the final interpretation, which is the common interpretation, I think that's I guess the simple way of learning it is the difference between Avodah Zarah of a Yid and Avodah Zarah of a Goy. That a Yid's Avodah Zarah that the Gemara is talking about, the Mishnah was talking about a case where it's a Jew worshipped the Avodah Zarah, it's a Jew's, and he worshipped it, so therefore it's considered that it's going to be burned. A Goy's Avodah Zarah is not necessarily going to be burned because he would be able to nullify it, and therefore because he can nullify it, it's not necessarily going to it doesn't miss its measurement because it's not necessarily going to be burned, and therefore it would be kosher after the fact, even though the preferable way would be not to use it at all. Okay, so that's the conclusion of this little piece, and the Gemara actually ends off and says Dekanami. It's also meduyak. It's also implied like this. The Tani, because it says in the Mishnah Dumyo de'erani dachas, that it's similar to the city that has been convinced to worship idol. The majority of the city was that the law there by Irani Dachas, where the city that worships idols has to be burned, everything in the city. So therefore, this would be a similar case where it has to be burned, and that would be a reason why it's not kosher, because it no longer has the measurement required for a lulav. Shma mina. This is Rabbi, what we hear this from. Yes.
What do you mean? What do you mean nullify it?
A guy would be able to say, "I am no longer worshiping this idol," and that would be considered like the idol. Or he has to do an act actually to it. Maybe he has to break off a little piece of it or something, and to show that he's not no longer going to worship it. So it loses its law of Avodah Zarah, and you would be a lot of benefit from it. So my example was that if it's made out of gold, you could then melt it down. He breaks off a little piece, and then you could take the gold and melt it down, and you have a nice bar of gold.
But a Jew can't do that.
Jew won't benefit if he does. Even if a Jew does that, it won't allow him to use it to benefit from that
melted gold.
Even if it's owned by a Jew, he can't do it. A Jew can melt down the gold after a goy nullifies a goy's avodah zarah, but after a Jew nullifies his avodah zarah, you still can't benefit from that gold, from that piece. You cannot
from that piece. But if you just totally destroy it, I mean, you're melting it down. How do you know that it's in another piece? It totally lost its identity. It's melted. I don't know. I'm just asking.
You can't benefit from it. If you want to benefit from the ashes, that's another story. If you were able to burn, if it's wood and you want to benefit from the ashes.
You're melting down a gold medallion.
Then you can't do it.
Oh,
You can't benefit from it. It's the same item. Ashes might have a different law. I have to look it up if ashes would
yeah.
be included. But the gold you wouldn't be able to benefit from it. Okay.
Rabbi, question.
Yeah.
When you say, for example, let's say it was an idol made of gold and he nullifies it by smashing it.
Right.
Okay, a small piece or whatever it is. When you're saying melt down, are we talking about the everything, including the small piece that he broke, or just the
Yeah.
or just
Yeah. Once he
one of-
breaks it, it's nullified. He can break his own and someone else and another guy's. He's allowed to break his friends as well. Once it's broken, it's considered like he's nullified the. No, it's not about which piece he broke off. It's about the fact that he broke it. He nullifies it. A guy is the one who made it prohibited. He can nullify it when he no longer believes in it. And then you can melt down both. So the Gemara continues with the next case. And the next case was Niktam Roishoi. The Niktam Roishoi was that the top of the lulav was clipped off. Now we're going to see there's a discussion here in the commentaries. Does it mean the top of the middle piece of the middle leaf of the lulav, or does it mean the tops of the tops of many of the pieces of the lulav? In other words, is it only one piece or is it more than one? So there seems to be a hint in Rashi over here where it says nistak. When he talks about where it's split, he talks about nistiku, plural. They split. The Roshei He'alin, the tops of the leaves have been split. So it sounds like Rashi is learning that both cases, not only the Nista case, but the Niktam case, which is being contrasted to the Nista case, that they're both talking about that a few of the leaves, or the majority of the leaves, they are clipped off. So Niktam Roishai, if its tops were clipped off, Amar Rav Huna says, Loishanu Ela Niktam. The Mishnah's case specifically is Niktam, where the tops of the majority of the leaves have been clipped off. Aval Nista kosher, but if it was split, that would be kosher. Now, I must tell you that very often after you shake the lulav many times, somehow that middle leaf does get split. As much as you think, wow, how's it going to get split? We don't have little kids playing with it, and it's not. Nope. It somehow, the more you shake it, or just time, I don't know. Somehow
it separates.
It separates, but I don't know why. Is that because as it ripens or gets old?
I don't know why it do. I don't know why the sun rises in the east, but it do.
Somehow it often has that, and I don't know if it's because of waving it or because because you're shaking it, or because sometimes you're leaning it on things or it's hitting something. But whatever it is, it does happen often. Now, to say that most of the leaves have that, no, but to say the middle leaf, those that learn that it's talking about the middle leaf, this is a very common problem. So don't think that we're dealing with something that doesn't happen. We're talking about nistak. This happens very often, and I often, when I check even in the Judaica stores where they're selling the lulavim, often I'll find a few of them that the middle leaf is already split a little. That even before you buy it, sometimes they're already split. But and this is what our Gemara is dealing with. Now, Gemara starts off dealing with if it's clipped. Now, clipped is not common at all. Clipped. So Rav Huna says that the case in our Mishnah where it says that it's not going to be valid is niktam. Niktam roishai nifritzu olav. The leaves fell off. Puzzle, it is invalid. But those are cases that's invalid. The Gemara says that Rav Huna says that's only niktam, but nistak would be kosher. But nistak kosher, the Gemara says, really? Is nistak if it's split, it's kosher? Tanya lulav kafuf. Didn't we learn in a brisa that a lulav that is kafuf, which means that its top is bent over. Now, this is also a very interesting topic of discussion, and it's discussed at length. And you will find this issue when you go and buy a lulav. There's something called a kneppel on the lulav. And some want to say this is what our Gemara is talking about, a lulav kafuf. And lulav kafuf, if the lulav is bent over, and Rashi translates it, Roishay kafuf ke'egmain. The top is bent over like a fishing hook, a fisherman hook. But basically, it's bent over. It's similar to a man who is bent over and bent down, bent over and downward. And so this type of lulav, the Brisa says that it's either kafuf, kavutz. Kavutz means, and now we turn the page 32a. Kavutz is that it has little hairs coming out of it, almost like thorns, koitzim, coming out from the spine, all along the spine. It's like little pricks coming. So that would be a kavutz lulav. The saduk is that the way Rashi seems to be learning would be that it's the majority of the leaves are split. And or if the spine is split. And another case would be akum. Akum is that it is bent. In the middle of it, it is bent. It's doime lamagol, similar to a sickle. So it's like rounded. And that would be the bent. And pasul, these are all pasul. So these are all invalid. Now, charus, what is the case of charus? Charus is that it became so hard that its leaves have been separated from the spine, and similar to a palm frond that we have here in Florida. The spine gets hard and the leaves separate. Now, such a case, charus is pasul. Now, what about if it's invalid? What about if it's doime lecharus? It's starting to get hardened, the spine, but it hasn't hardened completely. So in that case, it is kosher. It is kosher, which means the leaves are starting to slowly separate, and that would still be kosher. Now, what did we see in this brisa? That lulav that's saduk, that's split, is invalid. Now, what did Rav Huna say? Rav Huna said only niktam is invalid, but nistak, saduk, if it's split, it's kosher. So the Gemara is asked contradiction on a question on Rav Huna. So what's the Gemara's answer? Amar Rav Papa. So the Gemara answers that Rav Papa says this, that the Brisa says that it's split doesn't mean that the tops were split, or that the spine is split. Rather, it means da'avid kehimnik. That the lulav is something that splits into two, like maybe like a Y or a V. That the tops split apart, and this is the way the lulav grew, and in a way that it's almost like it has two separate spines, and one goes this direction, one goes that direction. Now, what happens if it's really split in a way that's not like this hymnic? Then it would be kosher, like Rav Huna. That would be Rav Huna's law, that if it's split, it's kosher. So what comes out from here is that in our case that we're dealing with, which is the split lulav, the split seemingly should be kosher, but if it's made like a hemnik, which basically means that the leaves seem to to separate into two, divided into two separate divisions, that would be a problem. It would be invalid. The example that Rashi gives is that it's like two shedrois, two spines. Half the leaves are going to this spine, and half the leaves are going to that spine, or or this way, and half the leaves are going that way. So that's the understanding of the of the Rav Papa to answer this contradiction, this question on Rav Huna. But what we did see is this interesting issue of a lulav kafuf, a lulav that's bent over. Now, the issue with the bent over lulav is that there's something called a kneppel. A lot of lulavs, the way they grow is they grow and they sort of bend over on the top, and the leaf has an extra piece that bends over, and it around. Some of them are rounded even, and the typical lulav that I buy, or that I would think the majority of Yidden buy, is the ones that come to a point on the top. They all go straight up and come to a point, and the top leaf is straight up, and it's a very nice pointy piece at the top. Some of the lulavs have something called mach. They have some type of I don't know what you would call it in English, but the residue, like the psilus, there's something I don't know what would you how would you say it, the mach, Isaac, anyone?
I'm trying to think of a word I can use here.
It's like mulch almost. It's a little like
Yeah.
a little like mulch. What did you say, Ezra? Fuzz, yeah. So it has some extra stuff that grow on the top, which in Lubavitch we really like it, because what it does is it proves that the lulav is not split at all. So it's nice and tight together, because it's and once that breaks off, that's when the lulav could start breaking apart. You could have these issues of nistak and hemnik. You could have these type of issues, but until then, when you have that stuff on top, it holds it very tight together. Now, I could understand that there's other minhagim that they like you to give a good shake and that all the leaves shake apart. But in Lubavitch, they're not makbid for the shake. They like to have, they don't care about the leaves waving back and forth. Lubavitch, the minhag is that it's very tight. Is the better lulav is the one that's really tight. But in any event, the point that I'm making is about the point on top. The issue, the point on top is important according to
what is special about, I forget the name, the lulavim they sell, like the premium ones are called
Dairy,
right?
Yeah,
what is different or special about those?
Well, the simple thing is that they're just hand picked, that they're claiming that they're good lulavim. Now they're not perfect, but they individually wrap them, that they're safe, that they're not banging against others, and generally they're kept a little more fresh, and you have a better chance that you're having
class A lulavim, whatever. You can have an upper class, why not?
Right, like grade A, right?
Right.
So that's right. What it seems like, that they're more like a grade A.
Right. Better tended, taken care of, just the way you said it.
Right. But
you can definitely pay a premium price, and you get it.
Yeah, you definitely find kosher ones among the others.
Right.
But these are like handpicked, So, but you can't rely on it. You still have to look at each one, because even though they handpick it, somehow sometimes it slips through a few not such great lulavim gets slip in over there, and they end up making their way into the dairy lulavs. So you do need to check it. Now, the thing is that the kneppel is what becomes a problem. Why? Because our brisa here, this brisa on page Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, the bottom, the last word on the page, 31b, says kafuf. And that word kafuf is invalid. The Gemara says is puzzle. That the lulav kafuf, the Gemara concludes on page 32, and the second line there it says puzzle. It's invalid. Or the first line, I should say, is puzzle. That the first that it gives a whole list of things. One of them is the kafuf. That's invalid, and some want to say that means that it's the knepel lulav that gets bent over on the top, and that's the case. That's invalid. Now, that's one way of learning this Gemara that it's talking about such a case, and that's why many people are very makbid not to have the knepel. They're makbid, they're machmer, they're strict. Don't get a lulav that has that bends over, because they want to learn that maybe that's the case that it's talking about, that it bends over. The Rosh argues, and he says, no, on the contrary, I love to have a knepel, because then it keeps it tighter together. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about if it's bent over, if the lulav is cracked, is bent, is it's an invalid. That's what we're talking about. That it's bent over. Not that it's that the top leaf has the way the leaf grows, it grows a little rounded. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about if the whole lulav comes upside down and turns up. That's where it's invalid. Couple. But the knepel is something good. So some people follow the Rosh, and they davka want to use the knepel, because the Rosh says that's not what the case is talking about. That's not what kafuf means. But others say we should be machmer. Just that could be a meaning of kafuf, that it's referring to the knepel. So therefore, then you have some people who say, you know what, I'm getting two lulavim. One is going to have the knepel, one without, and they shake both. They want to fulfill all opinions. But the common understanding is that people try to be machmer, not to use the knepel, even though there definitely is a source that it's okay. But there are other sources that it's not. So that's the lulav kafuf. It's good to know. The kavutz is not a common issue, and then the saduk that it talks about here is the hemnik, and that's something that we have to look into, what exactly it falls into the category of kehemnik. At what point does it reach that? So that's something that we'll have to look into. Yes, Jeffrey. Yeah, you're muted. You're muted.
Rashi describes it like the end of a quill or something that's metal, like we used to have nubs we put on a stick, and it has the ink between the two pieces that's is split. Did you ever look at the old-fashioned pens that they had with the inkwells? It seems to be what Rashi is describing.
Right. I mean, he says a word in Old French called for, which on the side over here, it does say a kli l'sirtut kavim al ha'ar. It's a utensil used to make lines on leather on parchment. Yeah. Now, that to me sounds almost like, what's that in geometry? They use this type of a measuring thing that's like round, and then it comes to a diagonal. I don't know.
A compass, you mean?
No, they have a protractor that opens up.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway,
and
but they
put
use
it
something.
in and you make a circle.
Is that what it is? So anyway, they if you look at the Seifrim, they do have a machine that makes not a machine. It's a utensil that they use to scrape lines evenly.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember. I can't remember what exactly how it looks like. I'm trying to imagine it, but they do have such things. Anyway, so
I would think it's like a cone that has long that scratches along and because you're actually pressing it into the parchment.
Right. It goes, it's like evenly pressed in, makes a line. So that's what it sounds like. That's what that word in Old French is, poitzfur. So it sounds like that the ones they had only had two you could do two at a time, 2 lines at a time, because it had 2 rushim, 2 heads. Roishai probably chad mefutzel. Yeah, Roishai mefutzel. Yeah, that's what it sounds like. So anyway, so it divided. The question is to what extent. So we'll have to look into this hemnik because it is broad in Shulchan Aruch. This and it's it deserves to be looked into. When is the lulav fall into the category of kehemnik? Because that's what it means saduk here, and then the other lulavim, a doimel magol or okum doimel magol, it's very rare to have it like a sickle. I mean, it's not going to be so rounded. You're not going to find such lulavim in the store. And then the daimel charos or the charos or daimel charos, these are also not so not really so common. But anyway, so that's that's the contradiction that we had, and we answered it, that we're talking about that it's that there's 2 types of nistak, and the nistak that we were talking about is that it's the nistak that Rav Huna was talking about, that it's kosher, is where it's split, where the leaves are split. Now the Gemara continues and says, Akum daimel Amar Rava loy amran ella lefanov. So there's the Gemara says that Rava tells us that what does it mean that it's bent, that it's akum? It means that it's bent lefanov loy amran ella lefanov, only when it's bent in front of you. In other words, the what you would call it, the spine bends forward. But if it bends backwards, if the spine bends backwards, in other words, you're facing the spine is next to you, and you're bending it backwards, then that's briyasa, then that would be the normal way that it grew. Amar Rav Nachman says, let's studin kilafanav dami, that if it's bent to the side, it's considered like lefanav, in front of you, and therefore it would be invalid. Va'amri la kila acharav dami, and some say that when it's bent to the side, it's like liacharav, it's like it grows backwards, it goes a little backwards. Va'amar Rava says, Hai lulava de solik b'chad hutza, lulav, that its leaves only grow on one side. That's a very uncommon type of thing. The leaves, that all its leaves are only on one side. Balmumhu puzzle, that is considered a balmum, a blemished lulav, and it's invalid. Then the Mishnah said nifritzu olav, that the leaves were separated, and then you want to use that lulav. The Mishnah said puzzle, that when the leaves are separate, nifritzu olav, that was similar to the case of niktam roishai, and then it said nifritzu olav. The leaves are separated. It's puzzle. It's invalid. So the Gemara says, Amarav Papa nifritzu. What is nifritzu? That the leaves have been separated. The ovid ki chufya, that it's made like a broom, chufya. That how do you make a broom? You take all these leaves and you attach them together. So a lulav, that the leaves came off, and you're now tying them together to make it a lulav, to make it a palm branch. This would be invalid. This would be invalid. One here. This would be invalid. But nifridu, what is the case where they're spread out? The ifrude, that the leaves separated from the spine, they're not attached. They're attached, but they're not adhering to the spine. But they haven't been plucked away. And this would be kosher. So nifridu, the Mishnah had said, is kosher. So basically what Rav Papa is saying is that what's the difference between nifritzu and nifridu? Nifritzu is that they're separated and then you're tying them back together. Nifridu, the law is different. Than the nifridu is kosher. Nifridu means that they're just separated, that they're not exactly tight to the spine. They're okay. Up by Papa.